Hello and welcome to Legislative Report. I'm State Representative Keith Gillespie of the 47th District in York County, broadcasting today from York County at Moon Dancer Winery. And today we're being hosted by Jim Miller. Jim, you're the owner and CEO of this wonderful winery here in York County, and thanks for letting us come in today.
Sure, anytime. We're happy
Jim,
to have you.
Yeah, well, Jim, right now I guess we're right in the where the grapes are growing. The beginning part, I guess, of the winery, though I imagine there's probably other parts, planting the grapes and everything else that goes through that. Maybe you could explain a little bit of the process to it.
Well, yeah, we're down by one of our blocks of Cabernet Franc right now, and this is one of our signature grapes. It grows really well here. I grow about 8 different varieties of grapes. The whole property is about 32 acres, and there's roughly about 10 or 12 acres of various varieties. The original part of the vineyard was planted in '98, just kind of started as a hobby. I planted some Cabernet Franc and some Chardonnay, and then realized we actually had a great place to grow grapes right here along the Susquehanna River. So I bought some more land and planted some more grapes, and now we're at the point where we're producing wine and growing grapes as well.
So was this, you said it was a hobby, I mean, was this like a lifelong hobby or an interest that you had that now developed into, I guess it's a big part of your livelihood right now, correct?
Yeah, well actually, no, it wasn't something I really had planned on. I guess I was a beer drinker at the time I started making wine, and I had a few grapevines near my house, and the one year there were more grapes than I knew what to do with, so I bought a book about how to make wine and picked about 2 or 3 bushels of grapes with my daughter, and the wine wasn't bad, so I thought, well, I'll see if I can find some vines, and actually connected with some growers in California that sell bare root vines that I was able to establish here in York County. So started the initial part of the vineyard just to be able to grow some grapes and to be basically a home winemaker. And then, as I said, I started making more and more wine, and then I was selling the predominant part of our harvest every year to other wineries, and realized that they wanted more grapes, so I started growing a few more, and then ultimately decided to start the winery so that we could produce everything here.
Okay. Well, the early part of your career, your initial background, I believe, was finance or investment.
Yeah, I was in the investment business for a while. I worked over in the Middle East for a couple of years. At the time, I still had the vineyard and the winery up and running. But now this has become a full-time job, and it's about 8 days a week. You get the rest of the time off.
Okay, well, I know we're coming into a busy time of the year here where you're probably getting ready to harvest these things, and we were talking earlier about some of the challenges with the bird and the deer that they also like to taste the grapes.
Yeah, that's right. As soon as the sugar level starts to rise a little bit, the birds come in, and they'll test the grapes a little bit. They usually just peck the berries, and then you'll start to get a little bit of rot if you don't control that. And then the deer, obviously, they if they can find grapes, they'd rather have that than grass or soybeans. So we do have a little bit of challenge with that, but I figure they're going to eat a little bit every year anyway, so you're going to just have to tolerate it and hope you get to most of them before they do. So
yeah, and weather, I understand, can also be a factor. I mean, we're coming into the time of the year where it's hurricane season, September, October. Thunderstorms. I mean, what kind of effect does that have on your?
Well, the weather certainly, throughout the growing season, and even through the dormant season in the wintertime is a big factor. But we're lucky here along the river where we get a little milder winter. We get a little more cooler temperatures in the summertime because we have that summer breeze blowing off the river. In the fall, we get a later frost because the river keeps it a little bit warmer here right along the banks of the Susquehanna. And then we also get a later frost as well. So during the dormant season, the river and being along this part of the state really is helpful for the vineyard. But when you get into the fall, when you get in your harvest and you're subject to hurricanes and heavier rains, no matter where you are, that can be a factor. So what typically happens, if we do get some rain, we end up having to let the fruit hang a little bit longer so that the sugar levels come back up. But this time of year, we've been pretty lucky. The last couple of years, we've had really good weather. And we've managed to avoid the big storms right before harvest and so forth. But if we do get rain, because we have really deep, well-drained soils here, a lot of that moisture will drain right through the soil, and it still allows us to get a pretty good crop of grapes.
Okay, it looks to me like something that would be very labor-intensive. Probably a lot of it done by hand. I mean, there's not such a thing as a grape picker machine that would come through and...
Well, there is in the larger vineyards up in the northeastern part of the state, up around Lake Erie. A lot of that fruit is machine harvested. I've actually purchased some fruit from machine harvest growers before, but I predominantly now use only hand-picked fruit. You can be a little more selective going through. You know, as you go through and you pick your clusters, you can pick out if you have a cluster that you have a problem with. I didn't bring my pruners with me. You can actually cut out part if there's any rot in there. You can see these are pretty good. There's a little bit of bird damage, which, you know, we don't worry about too much unless it's real bad. But we pick everything by hand, and we get a lot of volunteers that come in and pick. We do have some migrant guys that'll come help us out. But at the end of the day, if you can go through and pick it by hand, and if I can be in the vineyard as they're picking it, we can kind of control the quality of the fruit that's coming in and so forth. So right now, these are probably another couple of weeks away from being harvested. We go through and check the sugar levels. The sugar is basically checked with a refractometer. It just gives you an idea of how high the sugar is, and that dictates where your wine is going to end up with the alcohol and so forth. So you want to make sure you get to the right sugar levels and the fruit's ripe and that it tastes good. Would you like to try one?
I sure will. Thank you. Oh, that's great. Great.
Yeah, so this is Cabernet Franc. Cabernet Franc is one of the grapes that actually grows well in this part of the state. And on the East Coast, it's actually the parent grape of Cabernet Sauvignon, which is one of the recognizable wines that a lot of people think of when they think of a big, bold, dry red. But Cab Franc actually is a little more winter hardy. It's a little more fruitful here for us, and it ripens a little bit earlier. So if you do get an early frost or you do get a growing season that's a little more challenging, the Cabernet Franc's a little more predictable for us and does a really nice job. And we use that with our Cab Sauv, our Merlot, and our Cab Franc as a blend, and then we do it as a single varietal as well.
Wow, you certainly are a textbook on on the different types of wine. Now, you mentioned about being sensitive to the winter. You don't have to cover these or anything. The fact that they're hardy enough, they can go right through the winter.
Yeah, all of our vines are pretty much cold tolerant to about 5 degrees below zero. I grow all the vinifera varieties, which can be a little more sensitive to cold. But we have, because we're along the river, we do get a little milder winter time. Sometimes the river will freeze, but for the most part, that's not for that long of a period of time. So even if we do get a real cold snap and the river's not frozen, it manages to, you know, for us to keep it a little bit warmer here. I mean, we're probably the only vineyard in the state close to this large of a body of water, other than up around Lake Erie, because this part of the Susquehanna is about 2 miles wide. So, and we're, you know, only a quarter of a mile away from it here. So it really does allow us to grow the vinifera varieties consistently, get them through the winter without any problem. And you really do need some cold weather because you want the vines to harden off. So after we're done picking the grapes in another month or so, we'll then let the vines just go dormant, and we won't do anything more really in the vineyard until January or February after those vines harden off. And then we'll come back through and everything will get pruned. All of this growth that we see above the first wire here is all new this year. And the grapes will only grow on the first year shoots. So any second year wood isn't going to produce a grape. So all of these grapes are growing on what was a bud last spring, and those shoots grow up. So we really prune back about 90% of what you see on this canopy every year. Yeah. And if we have a winter that is a little bit harder on the vines and we do have some damage in the shoots, we can control that by how we prune and cut the buds back, or don't cut the buds back to give us, you know, a good harvest again.
Okay, so actually, when you go through and do that process, the leaves obviously have hit the frost, and you're just trimming back this year's vine. Yeah, just your shoots. Yeah. Great. How many employees do you have here? I imagine it's somewhat seasonal, but...
Yeah, it's pretty much seasonal. I mean, I have a couple of part-time people that work on weekends. I get a lot of volunteers, and we get family members that come in here. I'm getting ready to hire a couple people because we just started doing some food, and we're getting into our busier season now as we get into the holidays. So I never have enough employees. That's probably the best answer.
Well, you mentioned this volunteer thing a couple of times. I mean, people watching might be thinking, hey, I want to come down here and help Jim pick grapes or be part of the process.
Well, and certainly we're always open to that. So if they just get on our website at moondancerwinery.com, they can get an email to us through that, and we'd be happy to have them come down here and pick. And usually I give them a bottle of wine and a T-shirt and tell them it's a bad deal, but they keep coming back to do it. So
it sounds like a pretty good deal, and I think I can attest. My wife's had some wine from your cellar, and she gives it the thumbs up. Okay, Jim, I think we're going to head up to the to your facility up there and look at a couple other things, and and talk about the weddings that you do and some of this other agri-entertainment, as they call it.
Great.
Okay, Jim, we're here in the barrel room, or actually the basement, I guess, of Moon Dancer Winery, where you have a bunch of barrels, and I think you said there's aging and bottling and a lot of different processes that go on down here.
Yeah, that's right. Actually, the next step after we pick the grapes from out in the vineyard where we just were is to destem them. If it's a white grape, they get pressed right away, and then we pump the juice in here. If it's a red grape, they actually get destemmed and fermented on the skins, and then they'll get pumped into the barrels after they're fermented. But everything we do after the harvest is done below ground, and that way we can control the temperature. It's basically regulated by ground temperature, so everything stays pretty much constant year-round. But as I had mentioned, the white grapes will get picked first, typically in September. We'll pick those by hand, we'll bring them in, we'll go through the destemming machine, sort them somewhat if we need to, depending on the quality of the fruit. We'll destem the grapes and pump them right into the press, and then that juice gets pumped right into a tank. And at that point, we'll add the yeast depending on what variety of wine we're making and what characteristics we want from that wine. There's different strains of yeast that we use. And then after that fermentation's done, the wines all get pumped into the barrel cellar if it's a dry white or the dry reds. The sweeter wines stay in the stainless steel tanks, but the drier wines come in here to the barrel cellar. So predominantly everything is fermented in stainless and then aged in oak if it comes in here. There's one wine that we actually do ferment in the barrel, and that's our Chardonnay Reserve. And that wine is produced from the very first juice that comes out of the press. It's our free-run juice before we actually even squeeze the juice. We'll pump that right into the barrel, let it ferment and age in the same barrel for about 18 months to 2 years, and then we'll pump it out and then we start the bottling. So the barrels that we use, I mentioned a little bit, we're using Pennsylvania oak. It's actually white oak from the state of Pennsylvania. Most of it comes out from the western part of the state, but the cooper we use is actually a French cooper called Nadallia that has their U.S. operation. This is the cooper. Their U.S. operations in Calistoga, California, at the north end of the Napa Valley. So they build the barrels there. They actually air dry the wood for a couple years before they put the barrels together. And then before they put the head on the barrel, which is the end of these barrels, they'll actually build a little fire and tilt that barrel over the fire and char the whole inside of the barrel. And that's where this MTTH that you see on the bottom here comes in. That stands for medium toasted head. So that charring on the inside of the barrel gives the Chardonnays and the dry red that kind of toasty oak flavor that we like to highlight.
Wow. How long does one of these barrels last?
Well, the barrels typically I'll use for about 4 or 5 years, depending on which wines were in there. So I might get 2 or 3 vintages out of a wine. If it's a new barrel, I may only leave the wine in there for 12 to 18 months. Older barrels, I might leave in there for the wine in there for about 2 years. And it also depends if it's a red or a white. Once I put a red wine in a barrel, I'll always use that for red. Typically with newer barrels, and if I'm doing a barrel fermentation with the Chardonnay Reserve, I'll use the new oak for that, and then maybe put a red in after that. So then after we're done with the barrels, we'll either cut them in half and put petunias in them, or sometimes we sell them to home winemakers, or somebody wants to use them if they have a wine bar or a cellar at their house.
Well, we got diversification.
A little bit, yeah.
Jim, you mentioned about stemming things and aging stuff in the skin or not. When you're bringing the grapes in from the vineyard where we just were, I mean, we're probably talking tons here that you bring it at a time to start this process. I mean, how many tons will you harvest in a year's time? We
might go through 40 or 50 tons of grapes in a season.
Wow.
But we won't pick them all in one day. Obviously, we'll pick we'll pick maybe 4, 5, 6 tons in a day. The press that I use is actually an old press from a winery in Germany, and I can put about 1.5 tons in there at a time. Depending if it's fermented. If the grapes have already fermented, I can put a little more in. But if I do 6 tons of grapes in a day, that's a pretty good workout. That's about a 10-hour day till you get the press loaded, unloaded, destemmed, and reloaded again, and then everything cleaned up in between. So it's a pretty good, it's a pretty busy time. It's a pretty good time of the year to have extra hands if you can get them, because there's always plenty of work to do.
I can imagine. Well, let me try to break this down. But okay, let's say a ton of grapes, 2,000 pounds. What will that equate to actually the juice or whatever that'll go into one of these and then ultimately into a bottle?
Well, a ton of grapes, depending on the variety and depending on what kind of shape the grapes are in, but typically you figure about 150 gallons of juice per ton.
Okay.
One of these barrels holds about 60 gallons, so roughly about 3 barrels would give you about a ton of fruit would fill about 3 barrels.
Okay.
Each of these hold roughly about 25 cases or 300 bottles, so you're getting about 900 to 1,000 bottles maybe per ton once you've pressed and fermented and bottled that wine.
Okay, and then as you said, over the course of a season, you could do 50 or 60
Yeah, and then
tons.
we can actually, depending on what our supply is and how our tank space is, we may buy in fruit from other growers. We'll buy grapes, as I had mentioned, from some of the growers up around Erie for our sweeter wines, the Niagaras of Concord and Catawba. The vineyard here, the estate-grown grapes are the Chardonnays, the Riesling, some Pinot Grigio, Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Merlot, and Shiraz. And then if we have some extra, we might sell some. But typically, for the past few years, we've been buying more than we can grow. So, and we're going to be adding a couple acres next spring. We're going to put in some Malbec and some Petit Verdot as well, which are 2 varieties that are some of the Bordeaux varieties that we want to use in some of our blends for the reds.
Okay, now you mentioned about selling your product and you need to buy more grapes because you can't grow enough here for your demand. Are you selling the majority of it right out of here, or do you farm this out or ship it out to?
No,
other
we
places?
actually, that's right. We actually sell 90%, 95% of our wine right here at the winery, right upstairs at the tasting bar. We're open Wednesday through Sunday. Typically Mondays and Tuesdays we're not open, but if we're here and people come up, they typically will be able to get as much wine as they need. But we don't have anything in the in the estate stores. We don't have any other retail locations. We do some off-site festivals through the Wine Association and through some other groups that will be. Throughout typically the summer months, we might do 10 or 12 off-site festivals. We were just out in Pittsburgh and up in Harrisburg and out in Gettysburg for wine festivals. And those are functions that we do in conjunction with other wineries. So those are nice events because you get to meet the people in the other wineries in the industry, and it brings a lot of people in that maybe have not been exposed to Moon Dancer in their own backyard.
I know you have wayfinding on 30 signs directing you here. I mean, you're south of Wrightsville a little bit east of Eastern High School. What's that road that we would have come down off of 624?
Yeah, off of 624, right off of Kleins Run Road. If you come down, we're right up above Long Level. If you come off of 30, you just head south about 5 minutes, past Cool Creek Golf Course, turn left at the high school 1 mile, and take a right, and then another right off of Kleins Run, and we're right there. So.
Sounds great. Okay, Jim, we're out here on the patio of Moon Dancer Winery with a beautiful scenic view of the Susquehanna River and your wonderful facility here. I see a bunch of things going on. You got a wood-fired pizza oven back here. Have some families having a picnic, and looks like there's a tent set up over here on the other side. I believe you're having a wedding here tonight. Maybe you could tell us about some of the activities that you have here at Moon Dancer.
Okay. Yeah, this is kind of the focal point of the winery. After all the work's done in the vineyard and the cellar, this is where the public gets to come in and enjoy what we do. The patio overlooks the river and the vineyards. We do have a number of different things that go on here. We actually have music 3 days a week, Friday evenings from 7 to 10. We'll set them up on the patio if the weather's nice. If the weather cools off, or if we get some rainy weather, we'll do it in the great room. There's 2 fireplaces in there, so we'll do the music year round. So it's Friday evenings from 7 to 10, and then Saturdays and Sundays from 2 to 5. We also do other events where we have festivals with bands. We've actually have our Harvest Festival is October, the second weekend in October, and then we have a jazz festival, a bluegrass festival. We have a reggae festival in August. We have a stage down here that we'll use for the bigger events. The tent we'll use if we have a big outdoor event, or we'll use that for private events and weddings and so forth. So we really can do a lot of different things out here, and it gives us a lot of flexibility. We love to have people come up and be able to sit at the patio, enjoy the wine, and talk about what we do here. We did just add a wood-fired pizza oven this spring, so we now have wood-fired pizzas on the weekends. We're working on making some bread as well there in the mornings while the oven cools off a little bit. We'll get the breads going and then have that available typically on weekends. Basically we're here to do this year round. So in the wintertime when it snows, I have a little fireplace we put out here. We'll still have the music inside because the musicians get a little cold, but we'll find that most of the people like to be out here year round whenever they can.
Now, are these like local musicians that, or do you advertise and bring them in, or how does that work?
We actually do a little bit of both. The bulk of our weekend music is, our local musicians, typically acoustic music. We'll bring bands in for our festivals. For a reggae festival, we have some guys that come from Jamaica, as far away as the islands down in the Caribbean. We have some Grammy-nominated musicians that play here. The Reese Project has played here. They're actually a local band from up around E-Town. And then we get the whole array of music from jazz to blues to kind of soft rock, a little bit of country. We have some young musicians that come in here. We'll have some parents that come in and say, hey, my daughter sings. She's only 12 or 14, and they come and sing, and they do a great job. So we try to mix it up a little bit. So there's something there for everybody. We also do some food and wine dinners where we'll bring different chefs in that we'll do a food and wine pairing. And that's something that we start more in the fall as people are looking for things to do, as the weather changes a little bit. We do those sort of events as well. The other thing that we use the patio for, and the bulk of the winery, is for our wine trail events. We're members of the Mason-Dixon Wine Trail, as well as the Hershey-Harrisburg Wine Trail, and that's a group of wineries from the region where we do special events throughout the year, and people can go from winery to winery and taste the wine, enjoy the view, and each winery has its unique, offerings that people can get to go and participate in.
Well, that actually brings up a couple of questions. How popular are Pennsylvania wines becoming?
Oh, I think Pennsylvania wines, are becoming, more popular and popular every year. When we started the winery, I think we were number 90 or 99 in the state, something like that. Now there's over 150 wineries in the state. People are becoming more aware of the interesting wines that are available in Pennsylvania, from your, traditional sweet wines to the premium dry reds. When I started the winery, I was doing just the premium dry reds and dry whites, and then found that people did like the sweet wines. One couple would like the sweeter, one would like the drier, so we added that. So we now do about 12 or 14 different wines, which gives us the ability to offer sweet wines and even some fruit wines that we do, as well as our dry wines. But I think the wine industry is one of the areas of agriculture that's continuing to grow. It's a good business for the local communities because it allows the land to be used for growing grapes rather than for housing developments. All of the land that I have was subdivided for residential development. We've taken it back from what would have been residential development, turned it back into agriculture. A vineyard brings people in from out of state. We get people here every weekend from Virginia, New York, Washington, D.C., New Jersey, that want a place to go for a weekend, and they'll come here and spend an afternoon or an evening with the music, and then maybe go to a bed and breakfast, to a hotel, to a local restaurant, or to other wineries or other businesses in the vicinity. So it definitely is a growing area, and it's becoming more and more popular.
Well, thank you, Jim, so much for offering that to the community. That's great boost to the local community for something that you normally wouldn't think of. Mm-hmm. But I'm sure the local hotels and the gas stations and some of the other restaurants,
right,
if they're not having here, are very appreciative of that. Now, you mentioned about the wine tour, that you're part of that, and how many people will they get on something like that? Will stop by here during that? What is it, like a week or a weekend? Or
yeah, well, the biggest weekend is the Mason-Dixon Wine Trail month of March event, which is every weekend in March. So it's typically 4 or 5 weekends, and we'll get anywhere from 300-400 people a day that'll come through.
Wow!
And there are people that have been here the week before. There are people that have never been here before. There are people that will come every year and do the wine trail. And it really is a nice event for us because it allows us to be able to send people that we know to other wineries, and the other wineries to send people here. And that's the one nice thing about the wine industry. And by being able to come to a local winery and meet the local winemaker and see where the grapes are grown, it's an experience that you can't get going to the state store and buying a bottle off the shelf. So it really, the wine trail events for us are important to bring a lot of people in here. And for us, if we get somebody to come once, they'll be back. And that's, unfortunately, people like to say we're the best kept secret, but I try to tell them not to keep it a secret.
Well, that's a great segue, because actually we have a young lady here who has been on the Mason-Dixon wine show, but never had the opportunity to stop by here. I know you have some samples here that you're willing to share, and I think I just saw a pizza come by from your wood-fired oven as we get ready to close out here.
Yeah, this is actually one of our more popular pizzas. This is our margarita pizza. We use homemade dough and sauce. This is fresh mozzarella, fresh local tomatoes, and fresh basil. Right out of the oven. So, but we do the pizzas typically Friday, Saturday, Sunday when we have the music. Those are typically our busiest times of the week, and then we like to pair it with different wines. So, the wine that actually I opened here, this is one of our semi-sweet reds. This is our Moon River Red, and we've got a picture of the Susquehanna River Bridge there on
great picture of the bridge here at Wrightsville. You bet.
Yeah, and this is one of our popular wines. We also have our premium dry reds, which is the Moon Dancer label. This is a bottle of our Cabernet Franc from 2 years ago. And then our sweet wines, which we talked a little bit about, we do under our Moondog Cellars label. That's a little different style wine, a little bit sweeter. And we have about 4 or 5 of those sweeter and fruit wines that we use for that. So,
okay, well, Jim, unfortunately, we're just about out of time, but it sounds like it's a great time to taste some of this pizza, and Cheryl's going to have a sample of your wine here. I want to thank you so much for the opportunity to come down here and educate the viewers on Moon Dancer Winery. And that's all the time we have for today's legislative report. I'm State Representative Keith Gillespie. If you have any questions about Moon Dancer Winery or today's show, contact information will be on the screen in just a moment. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Legislative Report.